Hey, I'm Caleb. Today I'm going to talk about the types of project kits I like to get for the lathe, why I like these styles, and how you can turn them. So stick with me and I'll show you how you can make this too.
The kits I like to stick to these days use threaded inserts. They just require one hole, and the threaded insert then also provides a way to mount it to the lathe. Just screw in a mandrel or bolt and tighten that into a Jacob's chuck. The other style I like is just a tang that can be epoxied into a single hole. Simple and easy. The first kits I'm going to turn will be from this piece of apple wood from my father-in-law's land. He asked me to cut this down for him a few years ago, and I kept this piece to make something for them. It was standing dead for a long time before we cut it down and was really rotted, but I think I'll be able to save enough to make them something. So the first step was bandsawing it into workable pieces. Then it goes into my 4-jaw chuck to get turned to a rough cylinder that's oversized. I prefer to use a traditional roughing gouge to bring things from square to round, and a good tip is if you're not sure if all the flat spots are gone or yet, instead of turning off the lathe, you can just rest your tool on top of it, and if it bounces, then there are still some flats, and you need to go a little longer. Once it's about the size I think I'll need, I put the Jacob's chuck in the tailstock to drill the right-sized hole for the hardware. The wood is so soft and rotted, I'm not going to be able to finish. A problem I didn't think I would have to worry about for a few years. But in this case, the perfect prescription for harder wood is some off-the-shelf penetrating epoxy. My first idea was to stand them up so the excess epoxy would just collect in the cup, but it was running off the wood faster than it was soaking in. So I laid them down on a plastic bag to protect my bench and slathered them with the Total Boat penetrating epoxy as fast as they could soak it up. And once this stuff cures, this wood is going to stay hard a lot longer than 4 hours. But that'll take at least 2 days to happen. So in the meantime, I'm going to step out on the apple tree for something a little less fruity but nonetheless a nutcase: walnut. Again, it starts by breaking down at the bandsaw, and that's right, my blade isn't covered. Walnut is best enjoyed raw, the way it grows. Then I square the ends and cut these blanks to size because right now they're a little too long, something I've never been told before. And back to the lathe. I set up the first blank in my 4-jaw chuck. A good tip here is to get the piece as centered as possible and give it a quick spin to check and then adjust it as needed, then tighten it again. In the first few seconds of spinning, the piece tends to come loose just a little. This can be a safety and performance issue. Once I know the blank is fully restrained, I do what I should have done first on the apple wood and drill a hole for the hardware. By drilling it now, I'll be able to put my live center in the hole, and then when I rough it, that hole is going to stay perfectly centered. But before I get carried away with removing material, I set my calipers to the thickness of the base of the hardware. I want the handle to match that diameter where the two meet, so I need a way to check it. In a pinch, an adjustable wrench will work for this as well. And now a hopefully satisfying time lapse of taking this from a rough to finished shape. While you watch me play with my wood, I want to thank my top patrons: Chris Harmon, Randy, Tim Morrill, Wilson Matus, Jeremy Hopkins, Gabby Johnston, and Brian Monkey. They, along with patrons at every level, get to compete every month to win a tool. This month's contest is just post your personal making related goals for next year, and I'll pick a winner to get the tool prize, which is a rigid impact wrench. Of course, there is also free swag, plans, all kinds of other perks, and behind the scenes info. More details are in the description if you're interested. Now for sanding and finishing. Fortunately, sanding isn't near as tedious at the lathe. Off camera, I ran this through the grits in my Rockler turning sanding kit, and now I'm moving on to the Scotch-Brite pads, which will bring it to almost a polish. After the white pad, I start to apply my finish. I like to use a shop-made friction polish with equal parts alcohol, shellac, and boiled linseed oil. I like to saturate the piece with the first coat while the lathe is off, then wipe off the excess. Then with the lathe spinning, I'll keep adding thin coats while applying enough pressure to generate enough heat to cure the shellac. Over a few minutes, I normally build up about 10 coats before cutting the piece free. Of course, now there's a rough and unfinished spot on the handle, so I go to my belt sander to shape it up a bit before applying a bit of finish to it. Now, to mate the hardware to their handles, I mix up some Total Boat 2-to-1 epoxy with fast hardener, thoroughly wet the hole, and then slip in the shaft, making it sure it goes all the way down. Even Though those know each other pretty intimately now, it was still just a quickie project, so the penetrating epoxy is still hardening, so I'll do another kit. Off camera, I shrink and clone a blank into multiple smaller blanks and mark centers before forgetting to record the drilling the holes with my cordless drill to show that they don't have to be drilled on the lathe. But if you don't have a cordless drill or Jacob's chuck for your lathe, a drill press will also work in a pinch. Then I screwed in the threaded inserts. Well, screw and insert, that almost sounded dirty. I'm glad that didn't get awkward. Anyway, with the threaded insert in place, mounting these on the lathe is as easy as threading it onto my mandrel in the choke. This one just uses a 1/4-20 thread though, so it's a pretty small stud. I don't trust it to get the job done alone, so I slide the tail sock center into the tail. Unlike the cone center I used earlier, this one has a short point with a flat spot that will provide more contact. I think I'll just call it the shocker. Now that it's pretty effectively spit roasted, I can come in and rough it up with my rough and gouge. Once it's round, I switch to my carbide tools to bring it to shape. I'm not really good at explaining this part, but don't worry about it too much. Once you've got your tool in your hands, it's pretty intuitive, almost instinctive. Your hands just kind of know what to do. And as you get more experience, you'll be better at moving through different positions and techniques as you read the situation. And time to start the finishing process. I run through the grits by hand, like earlier. If you're wondering about the single glove, it's because only one hand is needed for the friction polish, so I save on gloves by not covering both. It's a tip from my doctor. Another tip is between the grits, stop the lathe and stroke the sandpaper along the length of the wood. This will change the direction of the scratches from across the grain to along the grain, making them far less visible. And make sure to do it between each grit. Otherwise, you'll get to the end and we'll be trying to sand out 120 grit scratches with 600 grit paper, which is kind of like trying to chop down a redwood with a pocket knife. It's not going to go well for you. It's important not to forget to pull out the tailstock and sand the butt of the handle. Fortunately, being in the lathe, it's easy to rotate and make sure the underside gets attention too. For the bar kits, I'm going to gloss over much of this because it's the same. I screwed a threaded insert into the blank, mounted it on the mandrel, roughed it out, turned it to shape. I did a slightly different technique on these though. I didn't want a dimple on the end, so I left the marble wood blanks oversized and left the waste attached, even through the finishing process. I'll linger on this polishing a bit though, since I forgot to record it on the sheaves knife set, and it's pretty satisfying. Then I part off the waste and round off the butt of the handle. Seriously, that's the name. I'm not trying to make this weird. Then sand and polish the bare butt. With the butt stuff done, the applewood is finally hard and ready for action. Another advantage of drilling the hardware hole before applying the epoxy is the fibers there are tougher, so don't have to worry about the threads blowing out or anything. I really don't mind butt dimples though, so for this, I cut off the excess at the bandsaw before going to the lathe. And bonus, this also lets me see how well the penetrating epoxy penetrated. It really got in there deep. Then it gets turned down, same as the others. You'll notice when it starts that it's kind of lopsided and wobbly. That goes back to what I said earlier. I should have drilled the hole and put the live center in it before turning the blank round. That would have kept the hardware hole centered. Fortunately, I left this girthy enough that there's still plenty to get the job done. Then off camera, I just screwed the hardware onto their handles, but I left that out because it seemed a bit too suggestive for YouTube. Anyway, I hope you learned something, were inspired to make, or at least entertained. Until next time, make time to make something.